Beyond the Hype, a fashion lifestyle tech podcast. Presented by Stephanie Williams and Greg Lewis.
All right, so buckle up, listeners, because today we are diving headfirst into the wild world of EU digital regulations.
Yeah, specifically MiCA and DORA.
Ooh, yeah, two acronyms that honestly just sound like they could be villains in like a spy movie or something.
Right.
But trust me when I say that this is way more interesting than any action flick out there.
Definitely.
We are talking about the rules of the game for finance, like in the digital age, guys.
It's true.
No pressure, EU, right?
Yeah. I mean, while it seems really complex at first glance, at the heart of it, what we're seeing is the EU tackling two, huge EE challenges, all at once.
Okay, hit me.
On the one hand, you have the rise of cryptocurrencies. And then on the other hand, you have, the ever-present threat of cyber attacks.
Oh, yeah, that never goes away.
Never goes away, no.
Like two totally different things.
Yeah, and so think of it like this. MiCA is sort of like building guardrails for this brand new financial highway.
I like that.
While at the same time, DORA is reinforcing the existing infrastructure of the entire financial system.
Okay, I love that analogy. So it's like MiCA's dealing with the new stuff and DORA is making sure the old stuff doesn't fall apart when the new stuff arrives.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break it down.
Let's do it.
First up, MiCA. The Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation, super catchy, rolls right off the tongue.
It does, yeah.
So in a nutshell, what's the big idea here?
So in a nutshell, MiCA is all about bringing some order to what has essentially been the Wild West of crypto. Right?
Yeah.
For years, it's just been like this.
Do whatever you want, it's the Wild West.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So think licensing for crypto service providers.
Okay.
Classifying different types of tokens, like stable coins, and then crucially making sure that investors have some level of protection.
Okay, so it's the difference between panning for gold in a muddy river versus having an actual regulated mine with safety standards and all that good stuff.
Exactly. And that's where this gets really interesting, because what we're seeing is MiCA has the potential to make the EU a global hub for crypto innovation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But, and this is a big but, there's always the risk that too much regulation could stifle that growth.
Yeah.
It's finding that balance.
It's you want to have the rules there to protect people, but you also don't want to crush the creativity and the innovation that's happening.
100%.
Okay, so we've got to walk that tightrope.
It's a tightrope walk for sure.
All right, so that's MiCA sort of trying to wrangle this new frontier of finance.
Yeah.
But then we have DORA, which is this whole other beast, right? Dealing with digital operational resilience.
That's right, that's right.
So give me the gist. What's DORA all about?
So think of DORA as the cybersecurity watchdog for basically every financial institution in the EU, not just crypto players.
Okay, so this is way broader.
This is much broader.
This is the whole financial system.
The whole shebang. Yeah, so we're talking banks, insurance companies, even those third-party tech providers that kind of keep things running behind the scenes. DORA wants to make sure that they can withstand, cyber attacks and system failures and all of that.
So if a hacker tries to drain my bank account or a software glitch brings down the entire financial system, DORA is there to make sure that things don't completely go haywire, right?
Yeah, precisely. And I think you've hit on a really important point there, which is that DORA is really about creating a much more resilient and secure financial system overall, which at the end of the day benefits everyone, right?
Right.
Of course there are going to be challenges.
Oh, I'm sure.
Implementing any new rule is going to take time and it's going to take money.
Of course.
Which could be a burden, especially on smaller institutions.
Right, of course.
But, that's kind of the give and take, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got MiCA trying to kind of lasso the crypto Wild West, and then we've got DORA, doing their cybersecurity patrol, making sure that the entire financial system can weather any digital storm that's coming at it.
I like it.
But I think, let's zoom in on MiCA for a second.
Okay.
Because we've talked about the really broad strokes, bringing crypto into line, trying to regulate it, make sure it's not the Wild West.
Yeah.
But what's the nitty gritty? What is actually changing?
Okay, so one of the most significant aspects of MiCA is that it's actually attempting to categorize different types of crypto assets.
Okay.
Because imagine trying to create tragic lives if you weren't even sure what counted as a vehicle.
Oh, okay.
Bro, like, is this a car? Is this a truck? It would be chaos.
It would be total chaos.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you're right. I mean, how can you regulate something if you don't even have like a shared understanding of what that thing is, right? Okay, so it's kind of like saying, okay, we've got cars, we've got trucks, we've got motorcycles, and each of those needs like its own specific set of rules based on how they operate, based on, how dangerous they are, that kind of thing.
Precisely. So MiCA, for example, distinguishes between things like utility tokens, which are those tokens that are used within a specific platform, versus, say, stable coins, which are those tokens that are designed to mirror the value of something like the euro or the dollar.
Okay, yeah.
And just like we were saying with the vehicle example, different rules are going to apply depending on the type of crypto asset.
Okay, that makes sense, right? Like a scooter shouldn't require the same license as like an 18-wheeler.
Exactly.
Okay. So how does MiCA deal with something like stablecoins then? Because, those are often touted as being sort of like this bridge between like traditional finance and the crypto world.
This is where it gets really interesting because stablecoins are designed to maintain stable value, right? Right.
Pegged to an existing currency, they've actually become increasingly popular.
Makes sense.
Because it's a way to kind of dip your toe into crypto without going, full on.
Right, without the volatility.
Without the volatility.
That makes it less scary.
Exactly. But of course, with that increased popularity, then also comes concerns, right?
Because if it's pegged to something and then that thing goes belly up, then you're in trouble.
What happens?
Yeah.
What happens if a stable coin pegged to the euro suddenly loses its peg?
Right.
The repercussions of that could be, quite significant.
It would be like if suddenly like the rug was pulled out from under everyone who thought that like their digital euros were like as good as cash.
Exactly.
Yeah, not good.
So that's why MiCA is so concerned with making sure that stability is like rock solid.
Okay.
And one of the key requirements is that stablecoin issuers actually have to hold reserves.
Actual assets that match the value of the stablecoins that they've issued.
Oh, interesting.
So if a company issues, let's say, €1 million worth of a stablecoin, they need to have €1 million in reserve.
Okay.
Ready to back those digital tokens.
So it's like saying you can't just like print digital money without having something to back it up.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's all about mitigating risk, not just for the individual investors, but also for like the stability of the entire system.
Yeah, it's like that old adage, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly right. You can't just print money out of thin air.
You gotta have something to back it up.
You have to have something to back it up.
Okay.
Now, of course, again, we come back to this kind of concern about over-regulation, right?
Right.
Because there are some that would argue that this is just too much.
Right.
That this is going to stifle the innovation that makes this space so dynamic.
So it's that same balance again, right?
It's finding that balance.
Oh.
Yeah, finding that balance between fostering that growth, but also making sure that there is some stability.
Yeah, okay. I feel like this is going to be a recurring theme.
I think so.
As we talk about MiCA and DORA, because it is that balance, right?
It is.
It's like, how do we walk that tightrope between letting things grow?
It's the question.
And also making sure that nobody's getting completely taken advantage of.
Yeah, 100%. And and the lines are blurry, right? Yeah. Where is that line?
Exactly, yeah.
Tough question.
So while MiCA is, grappling with the intricacies of crypto, like you were saying, DORA is busy trying to fortify the entire financial landscape against, all these cyber threats that are out there. But DORA's reach extends way beyond just building stronger firewalls or patching vulnerabilities, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a lot bigger than that.
Because one thing that DORA recognizes is that financial institutions, they're not islands, right?
Right.
They are incredibly reliant on these third-party technology providers for everything, for cloud storage to data analysis, you name it. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, they can't do it all themselves.
No, absolutely not. And
they need help.
And this interconnectedness, while it's amazing for innovation, it also unfortunately creates vulnerabilities.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because it's more points of failure. Right?
Exactly. Imagine, for example, you have a bank, right?
Okay.
And they've got top-notch security, like Fort Knox level security.
Oh, okay.
But then their cloud provider suffers a breach.
Oh.
Suddenly, the bank's data all their customer data, all of that is at risk.
It's like building this like fortress and then forgetting to like, secure the back gate or something like that. All that effort for nothing.
Exactly. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right?
Right, exactly.
Even in the digital world.
So how does DORA deal with that? Because I feel like that is often like overlooked.
Well, that's one of the things that makes DORA kind of unique in a way, because it doesn't just stop with the financial institutions themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Right. It extends its reach to those third-party tech providers and says, you're accountable too.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're holding them to the same standard.
To the same level, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Of cybersecurity and operational resilience.
Okay, so it's a shared responsibility then.
It's shared responsibility.
They're both on the hook to make sure that these systems are like totally watertight.
Exactly.
Okay. Exactly.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's like you're both responsible.
And again, it's not just ticking boxes. DORA is really trying to cultivate this culture of cybersecurity awareness.
Right.
Where everyone involved in delivering these essential financial services is working together to ensure the resilience of the system.
It's like a team effort.
It's a team effort.
You can't just pass the book to someone else and say, not my problem.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all in this together. We're all in the same boat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes in the digital world, it's easy to forget that.
Yes.
That it really is all interconnected.
Yeah. And all of this, while it sounds great in theory, implementing all of this stuff, it's got to be a Herculean task.
It's a huge undertaking, but I think, one of the things to remember is that the EU isn't like flipping a switch overnight.
Right. This isn't happening tomorrow.
No, this is going to be a phased approach. It's going to take time. And the idea is to give businesses time to adapt and adjust.
Okay.
It's not about causing chaos and disruption.
So you're saying it's more like building a house. You laid a foundation, you frame the walls, you get the plumbing in there before you even start thinking about painting the walls.
Exactly. A step-by-step process, making sure that each element is in place before you move on to the next.
And they're taking their time with it.
They're taking their time, and they seem committed to getting it right, which I think is important.
Especially with something as big and as impactful as this is probably going to be, I would hope that they would take their time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's less about dictating from on high and much more about fostering a sense of, again, this collaboration, this shared responsibility for shaping the future of digital finance, which I think is quite interesting, honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it does feel very much like the EU is trying to be very thoughtful about how they're approaching this.
Yeah.
And trying to be very collaborative in terms of, how they're bringing these rules and regulations into play.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not just them saying, this is how it's going to be, deal with it. It's very much like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's try to figure this out.
Exactly. And I think what's interesting about that is that they're acknowledging that this world moves so fast.
Right.
That, even as they're drafting these regulations, the technology is evolving.
Right. They're already outdated by the time they're, signed into law.
Exactly. So it requires them to be, much more dynamic.
Right.
Flexible.
Limits.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're trying to strike that balance, right? Between fostering innovation and ensuring stability. It seems like every time we talk about this, we come back to this idea of balance. And, how do you find that sweet spot where you're encouraging growth, but you're also making sure that people are protected?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, and like you said, protecting consumers without stifling that dynamism, that innovation.
Because that's what makes this whole thing so exciting.
Exactly.
Right? The fact that it's like we're constantly pushing the boundaries.
It's interesting.
But it's also terrifying at the same time, because it's like how much of this stuff
it can be.
Can we even wrap our heads around before it becomes something totally different?
Yeah, and that's what makes it such a fascinating time to be following this stuff.
Right.
Because we really are witnessing a fundamental shift in how we think about finance and technology.
Totally.
And just even the nature of trust in the digital age.
Yeah, what does it even mean to trust something in the digital world?
Right.
It's such a different concept
it is.
Than what we're used to.
Totally.
Okay, so I think this is a great place to put a pin in it for part 1.
I agree.
Of our deep dive into MiCA and DORA.
Yeah, let's take a breath.
Because we've talked about a lot of the background here.
We've laid the groundwork.
We talked about how they could potentially reshape the entire financial landscape, not just in Europe, but globally.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a whole other can of worms.
It is.
That I think we should probably just save for part 2.
Agreed.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about the global implications of MiCA and DORA.
Stay tuned.
So don't go anywhere. So last time we were talking about MiCA and DORA and how they're fundamentally changing the rules of the game for digital finance in Europe.
Yeah, it's like the EU is drawing a line in the sand and saying, the future of finance is digital and we are setting the standards okay.
Yeah. Exactly. But the million-dollar question is, will the rest of the world actually follow suit?
Yeah, that's the billion-euro question, isn't it?
Right.
Because the impact of these regulations, it could extend far beyond the EU's borders.
Totally. It's like that old saying, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas, especially when you're talking about something as interconnected as the global financial system, right?
Precisely. And, the EU isn't exactly a small player on the world stage.
No, they're pretty big.
Yeah, so when they set a standard, especially in a field as influential as finance, people tend to pay attention.
Right. It's like setting a trend, Suddenly everyone wants to wear the same hat.
Exactly. We've kind of seen this happen before, right? With things like GDPR.
Oh, yeah.
The EU's data privacy regulation.
Yeah.
That set ripples throughout, the entire tech world.
Yeah, everybody had to scramble to, catch up.
Yeah, prompting companies globally to, rethink their data practices.
Yeah, are we actually following the rules?
Exactly.
Right.
Better double check that.
Better double check.
So you're saying that MiCA and DORA could have a similar ripple effect, influencing how other countries approach their own digital finance regulations?
It's definitely a possibility. And in fact, we're already seeing some signs of it. If you look at the Financial Stability Board,
okay,
which is this kind of global watchdog for the entire financial system.
Right.
They've been keeping a very close eye on MiCA, especially as they develop international standards for regulating crypto assets.
So it's the EU is becoming a trendsetter in a way.
Yeah. Kind of.
They're saying, this is how you do it if you want to be on the cutting edge.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this Brussels effect, as it's sometimes called, yeah, it's a good one, right? It's not about the EU, forcing these regulations on anyone.
Right.
It's about leading by example, showing what's actually possible when you combine innovation with, these robust safeguards and consumer protection. Okay, yeah, so showing that it's possible to do both, you don't have to choose one or the other.
Exactly. You can have both. You can have your cake and eat it too, as they say.
There you go.
In this case, you can.
Okay, all right. So while MiCA and DORA, might be EU-centric in their, creation, they could have a much broader impact, shaping the future of digital finance on a much larger, global scale.
It's true, yeah. And that's what I think makes understanding them so important, because we're not just talking about navigating the financial landscape of today, but we're really talking about the financial landscape of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Of the future, where these lines between traditional finance and this kind of new digital world are they're blurred.
Yeah, they're getting blurrier and blurrier every day.
Exactly. And the thing is, we don't even know what it's going to look like.
Right.
In 5-10 years, it's moving so fast.
And that's both exciting and terrifying at the same time, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Because it's on the one hand, all this potential. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's are we creating a monster?
Exactly. And who knows, right? We don't have a crystal ball.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the potential benefits of MiCA and DORA and how they could really change things for the better. Mm-hmm. But what about the other side of the coin?
Right.
Are there potential drawbacks or challenges, things that we need to be thinking about that maybe we're not excited about, but that we need to be aware of?
Well, yeah, because as with any major policy shift, anytime you change something this big, there are always going to be trade-offs.
Of course, you can't please all the people all the time.
Exactly.
So what are some of the potential downsides here?
So I think one of the biggest challenges with implementing any new regulation, right, is striking that balance.
There's that word again, balance.
Here it is again, because it's true. That balance between fostering innovation while also ensuring stability.
It's like walking a tightrope, right?
It really is. Because on the one hand, you want to encourage businesses, you want to encourage people to push the boundaries.
Yeah, take risks.
Come up with new ideas, exactly. But at the same time, you want to make sure they're not doing that at the expense of security or consumer protection, right? You don't want people to get hurt.
Exactly. And finding that sweet spot, like you said, that balance point, it's not easy.
No, I'm sure it's not.
It's a tough one. And you have very strong voices on both sides of this argument.
Oh, I bet.
So, for example, you have someone who would argue that excessive regulation would stifle the very innovation that makes the digital world so dynamic.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so too much regulation and you crush the creativity, the innovation.
Exactly. And so their concern is that, too many rules is just going to create barriers to entry.
Oh, okay.
Especially for startups,
right.
Smaller players.
Okay. The little guy?
Exactly. And it's going to end up giving, an unfair advantage to the bigger, more established institutions.
So it's like, instead of leveling the playing field, it's actually tilting it in the favor of the people who are already winning.
In a way, yeah. And the other concern is that it might discourage new companies from even entering the market.
Oh yeah, if it's too much of a hassle, why bother?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it's too difficult, too expensive, why bother? I'll just go do something else.
Right.
So it's a valid concern.
Okay.
That's one side of the argument.
Right.
The other side of the argument is that, proponents of regulation say that this is absolutely essential for building trust.
Okay. Yeah, which is important.
Which is crucial, right? Especially in a market like crypto, which is kind of, had a little bit of a bumpy road.
A little bit, yeah. It's had its ups and downs for sure.
Let's be honest.
Peace.
So they're saying, look, we need this to build that legitimacy so that people feel comfortable entering this market.
Right. So it's like the Wild West analogy again. At some point, you need a sheriff to come to town.
You need some rules.
You need some rules. You need some law and order to make sure that, businesses can thrive, but also that people feel safe investing their money.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it's like the Wild West. It's like, who knows what's going to happen?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's about finding that balance, again, that equilibrium where the regulations are there to provide a safety net.
A safety net.
But they're not so restrictive that they're preventing the good stuff from happening.
Yes, it's less about regulation versus innovation, and it's more about figuring out a way for the two to coexist.
To work together.
Exactly, to complement each other.
Okay, yeah, because they don't have to be these diametrically opposed forces, right? They can actually work in tandem.
They can work together, and it requires, I think, a lot of thoughtfulness on the part of regulators,
right?
To make sure that they're doing that they're creating an environment where that can happen.
Right. So it's less about being super strict and hammering down the rules, and more about being flexible and adaptable.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really, I think, key challenge here, which is the sheer pace of technological change.
Because it's moving so fast.
It's moving incredibly fast. And one of the things that often happens with regulations is by the time a regulation is actually drafted, debated, implemented, and then enforced,
right,
the technology it's trying to regulate might be already outdated.
Yeah, it's already moved on.
It's already moved on to the next thing.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly, while riding a roller coaster.
Right. It's like, good luck.
Good luck hitting that target.
You're not going to hit it.
Right.
So how do you even begin to regulate something that's moving that fast, that's changing that quickly?
Well, and I think that's why it's so important for regulators to adopt what's called a more principles-based approach.
Okay, what does that mean?
So instead of getting bogged down in very, very specific rules.
Right, which could be outdated tomorrow.
Exactly. They try to focus on the overarching goals. What are we actually trying to achieve here?
Right, what's the big picture?
What's the big picture, what the outcomes we're looking for, and then let the kind of specific rules, be a little bit more fluid, a little bit more adaptable.
Okay, so it's less about dictating every little detail and more about setting up a framework, like you said, that can then adapt to new technologies and changing conditions.
Exactly, because the reality is we don't know what the next big thing is going to be.
Nobody knows.
Exactly.
Right.
So we have to be ready for it.
So it's trying to future-proof as much as you can without actually knowing what the future holds.
100%. It's a tough job.
Yeah, no, I don't envy the people who have to try and figure all this stuff out.
No, they've got their work cut out for them, that's for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about like, you know, the EU kind of like, you know, leading the charge here with MiCA and DORA. But they're not the only ones, right? Like other countries and like regions are developing their own approaches to this whole thing.
They are.
So what does that look like? Is everybody on the same page here?
You would hope so, wouldn't you?
Right. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would make things a lot easier, but the reality is...
It's way more complicated.
It's far more complex, yeah. You know, different countries have different priorities.
Of course, yeah.
Different risk appetites, different levels of technological development, so it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
So it's less about, like, you know, having a single rule book that everybody agrees on, and more about, like, trying to find, like, common ground, I guess.
It's more like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle.
Okay.
Where each piece is a different country's regulatory framework.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And you've got to figure out how to fit them all together.
And they're all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
And some of them don't even look like they go together at all.
Exactly.
But you got to make it work.
You got to make it work.
Somehow. Okay, so how do we even begin to bridge those gaps? Like, how do we create like a more unified like approach to this whole thing?
Well, I think it starts with dialogue, you know, like actually talking to each other,
okay,
sharing information and best practices, you know, and thankfully there are organizations that are already doing this. You know, the G20, the Financial Stability Board, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision.
Okay.
They're all working to develop, you know, these international standards,
okay,
best practices. And it's about, you know, finding that common ground, figuring out where we agree,
right,
and working together to address the challenges.
Okay, so it's like a big like global brainstorming session.
Yeah, kind of.
Everybody gets in a room,
throws their ideas on the table,
and says like, okay, how do we make this work?
Exactly, because the reality is, in this interconnected world, especially in the world of digital finance, we are all in this together.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not.
We're all connected.
Yeah.
Okay, so finding solutions that work for everyone, not just a select few. That's key here.
It's crucial.
If we want to create like a stable, secure and inclusive digital financial future for everybody.
Exactly. I mean, it's a monumental task, but one that's absolutely essential.
Okay.
If we want to harness this like transformative power of technology,
right,
while also making sure that we don't, you know,
blow ourselves up in the process.
Exactly, that we don't let it run wild.
Yeah, right.
We need to steer it in the right direction.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive into MiCA and DORA. You know, we've talked about their potential to like reshape the financial landscape, the delicate balance between regulation and innovation.
Always that balance.
Right, always coming back to that.
It always comes back to that.
We've talked about the challenges and opportunities of creating like this globally harmonized approach to like digital finance.
It's a work in progress.
It's definitely, we're not there yet, but we're having the conversations, which I think is important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, just to kind of like reiterate, we've only just scratched the surface here.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is a topic that we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about. Days, weeks, months even.
Yeah.
So there's still so much more to explore here, so many different perspectives to consider, and really so many potential future scenarios.
Because it's all still up in the air, right? We don't know how this is going to play out.
We have no idea.
And I think that's both exciting and a little bit terrifying, but that's kind of the world we live in now, isn't it?
I think so. It comes with the territory, you know, this rapid pace of change. It's both exhilarating and a little bit scary.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta embrace the unknown. Okay, so I think this is a good place to maybe like take a deep breath.
Catch our breath. And when we come back, I think we should probably like bring this back down to earth a little bit.
Okay. Talk about what it all actually means for like, you know, the everyday person, for our listeners.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're going to take another break, but don't go anywhere because when we come back, we're going to be talking about the real-world implications of MiCA and DORA for you, the listener.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we've talked about MiCA, we've talked about DORA, we've talked about how they could potentially like reshape the entire financial landscape.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
Because I think it's all well and good to talk about like, you know, these global trends and these future scenarios that we've been talking about.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what does it actually mean for like the average person who's just trying to like, you know, navigate their digital life?
That's the big question, right?
Right. Like I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but like, I'm not a fintech CEO. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. Like, how does any of this actually like impact my life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here's the key takeaway, I think, is that both MiCA and DORA, they're ultimately designed to empower you, the consumer, in this increasingly digital world that we live in.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So think about it this way, right? MiCA, with its focus on regulating crypto assets, it's all about creating like a level playing field, right?
Okay.
It's about saying, look, if you decide to like dip your toes into the world of crypto, you're not entering the Wild West anymore.
Right, where it's like fend for yourself.
Exactly.
Good luck.
There are rules in place now.
Okay, so it's about knowing that there are rules, that the companies that are handling your digital assets are playing by the book, and that you actually have some recourse if something goes wrong.
Exactly. It's about building trust and transparency in a market that, well, let's be honest, has often been very, very murky.
A little shady. Yeah.
A little shady. A little Wild West, like we were saying. So it's about making crypto more accessible.
Okay.
And less intimidating for, the average person who's just trying to figure this stuff out.
And that's huge, I think, because I think, one of the biggest barriers to entry for a lot of people when it comes to crypto is that it just seems so, inaccessible.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
It's like this whole different language. It's like this whole different world. And I don't speak the language. I don't understand the rules.
Exactly.
So MiCA is kind of like having a translator, right? Like it's saying like, okay, here's how this works. Here are the rules. Now you can make an informed decision about whether or not this is something you want to get involved in.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. And then on top of that, you have DORA, which is kind of like working behind the scenes, right? to shore up the security of the entire financial system. So every time you log into your online banking, make a mobile payment, you check your account balance on your banking app, DORA's impact is there, even if you're not seeing it.
So it's like having a silent guardian, a digital bodyguard, basically.
I love it.
Making sure that those transactions are safe, that your data is protected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about creating a more resilient, more cyber secure financial ecosystem.
Right.
One that can withstand those inevitable shocks and disruptions that are going to happen in the digital age.
Right, because it's not if, it's when, right? Like we're going to have these cyber attacks, we're going to have these data breaches.
100%. That's the reality we live in.
Yeah, and it's like, how do we make sure that the system is strong enough to withstand those shocks, to bounce back from those?
Exactly. And it's about, going back to that word trust, it's about giving you that peace of mind, knowing that the systems you rely on every single day are built on this foundation of security.
And that peace of mind is priceless.
It really is.
Because I think, especially in a world where, we're hearing about these cyber threats all the time.
All the time.
It's like, it's hard not to feel like a little bit paranoid. Is my data safe? Is my money safe? Are my kids safe online? It's like...
Yeah, you're constantly looking over your shoulder.
Right, exactly. So knowing that there are these kind of safeguards in place, even if we don't see them, even if we don't think about them on a day-to-day basis, that's huge, I think, for people's just general sense of well-being in this digital age.
And it's not just about protecting you from financial loss either, right?
Right.
It's about protecting your privacy.
Yes.
Protecting your identity. Those things that are so fundamental to who you are, to how you interact with the world.
Yeah, because if you lose those things, if those things are compromised, it's it can feel like you've lost a part of yourself almost.
It can be really disorienting. Yeah.
So it sounds like MiCA and DORA are about way more than just regulations and acronyms and all that kind of bureaucratic stuff.
It's bigger than that.
It's bigger than that. It's really about, you're saying, it's about empowering people to actually be active participants in this digital world, and to do so with a sense of confidence, knowing that there are people out there looking out for them, making sure that things are fair and that their interests are being protected.
Exactly. It's about creating a digital future where innovation and security, they're not at odds with each other, where technology works for people, not the other way around.
That's a future I think we can all get behind.
I think so. I think that's something we can all agree on.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our deep dive into MiCA and DORA.
I made it.
We did it. We covered a lot of ground.
We
talked about a lot of different things, but as always, this is just the beginning of the conversation, right? We've given you, hopefully, a good overview.
A good starting point.
A starting point, exactly, but There's always more to learn. There's always more to explore. And we encourage you to do that.
Stay curious.
Stay curious. Exactly. Stay informed. Never stop asking questions, because as we go further into this, this uncharted territory of the digital age, knowledge is power.
It really is.
And the more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate all the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
And to advocate for yourself.
Exactly. To advocate for yourself, to advocate for the kind of digital future that you want to see.
That you want to live in.
That you want to live in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So on that note, that's it for us for this week.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Beyond the Hype, a fashion lifestyle tech podcast.